Welcome to the Veritas Podcast. Today, I have not one, but two guests on the show for a special Roundtable episode. The topic of the Roundtable is cancel culture. What is it? How did it happen? And how do we stop it? I have on the show to discuss this topic, libertarian commentator, anarcho-capitalist, and cosplayer Mack, also known as Kenziepuff, as well as digital strategist, political scientist, and blogger Téa Smith. Without further ado, I'll get this discussion started by asking my guests an opening question. And that question is simply, how would you personally define cancel culture? Mack, we'll start with you.
Sure. So my personal definition of cancel culture is going after people, especially people's livelihoods, families, and that sort of thing, over an opinion or something they've posted that people disagree with for whatever reason, to the point where you're essentially trying to ruin somebody's life. So I make a distinction between just gatekeeping and ostracism and full-on cancel culture.
Téa, do you have what do you think of that definition, or what does your definition look like? I imagine that it's fairly similar.
I agree, but my answer is it depends on the context, and the power. So for me, it depends on whether it is institutional bullying versus, or a celebrity or a normal worker, or I think that's why people are a bit confused, is because the definition shifts depending on the subject and the target and the context. And I think that it's become a catch-all for a lot of different things that aren't actually new, but I think it's just become a catch-all term for a lot of different things.
Yeah. I think that the lack of a clear definition is often used by people in the, I'm just going to go with woke cult, but there's a million different things you could call it. But they use that to engage in this sort of denialism, because it's easy when something isn't clearly defined to say, oh, well, it simply doesn't exist. Tell me where it is. They'll point to the celebrities as an example and say, well, this person's doing fine, even though J.K. Rowling is worth, $1.5 billion.
Yeah. Well, it's basically the stop hitting yourself of online discourse. But again, it depends, because I think I'm going to be a little more charitable because I differentiate also between the woke. One of the weird things I think about Australia versus, say, the US and UK is that you guys are empires, we're a colony. So it's a very different perspective on things. But I differentiate more of the classical European left analysis rather than this sort of US analysis. And I differentiate between the woke phenomenon, which is the gentrified left, the capitalist left, versus, the traditional left, which is that Marxist framework. So that's when I say it depends. Like talking about the woke as all of the left is very problematic, as I said. So, but if I'm charitable to these guys, sorry, I went off on a tangent, but I needed to clarify my position before I started saying this, which is because I'm charitable to postmodernism and charitable to these things. I know where they came from. I know that they've been weaponized by these empires as propaganda, right? And as in order for institutional bullying to be given a free pass. So when you actually know the history of this stuff, I see wokeism as a distinct phenomena from the traditional political left. So, but that's why that it's been distorted as some sort of social justice, but it's actually the powerful and elites that are doing, they're the ones that they think they're punching up, but they're punching down. It's like this weird, this is where I got thrown off initially. When I was going through this, I was like, this is confusing because they're making the noises, but they're not anything that I recognize in the left, right? But again, there's an international perspective. When I say it depends, there's lots of different lenses in which to look at this. And honestly, Chomsky's propaganda model is probably the best fit. So just wanted to let you know that they think they're punching up. So it's a psyop of middle-class kids who think they're punching up when they're actually bullying on behalf of institutions. And so...
Yeah, I agree with that. I think there's definitely an important distinction, and I catch myself doing it too. I make a really, there is a distinction between, like in the US, what we would call like classical liberal and what I would call a leftist. Like to me, the leftists are the wokies, the ones that are, doing, I do think they're being, like Téa said, I do think it is mostly, in my opinion, actually, I've told people this, one of the best ways to improve your experience online in any community, like nerdy or otherwise, even political spheres, is to just block people under the age of 18 as soon as you see them, whether they've said something or not. And it's not because I don't like young people. I just have noticed a huge trend. I think Téa definitely hit on something, that it's a lot of, for the most part, middle-class kids. You know, there's this joke even in the US of like the middle-class socialist kid that lives in the big house and they think they're oppressed and all this. That's mostly who it is. And they're doing it mostly on the behalf of people that are basically puppeting them and pulling the strings, and they think they're doing something super righteous. And I think that's part of the big problem with cancel culture.
Yeah,
but it's
and
also
it's not Noam Chomsky, right?
No, it isn't.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is that if you look at the classics, that they actually, and look at Marxist analysis, this is superstructure going off. It's just, it's easily explained from the left. But so basically, what was I going to say? There was another point that I missed. You can edit this bit out. Doesn't matter. Go ahead. There was a lot of thoughts, and then you moved to that, and then you mentioned Chomsky, and I was like, oh, it fits. Because if you look at the fifth filter of propaganda, right, it is basically anti-communism again, over and over again. Okay, these guys aren't communists. They are postmodernists that are like a gentrified version of the left. Which, if you understand the international stuff, I don't want to go into this because it's dry as hell. But you know, it's documented that the CIA have poured jet fuel on postmodernism as a deliberate attempt to implode Marxist and socialist and revolutionary action in the United States. So this is a campaign of 80 years that's actually been going on, right? So this network of stuff, it's all really just McCarthyism at the end of that. That's why it looks like McCarthyism, because it is. And that's why it's really interesting.
Yeah.
Very clever.
There's an element of it that is actually reliant on the capitalist system insofar that the main way to cancel somebody, like, yes, you can make somebody persona non grata in their social group, but that's only so much of a sacrifice to have them make, right? It's like, okay, I don't have as many friends as before. Maybe I don't have any. It's them getting fired from their job. That is what truly makes people feel that fear that keeps them from speaking out. And that is, there's a certain amount of reliance on a free market capitalist system therein.
Yeah. And that's why I've always said, I don't think anybody who is an actual socialist would ever weaponize employment or healthcare or unemployment benefits against a worker and someone's livelihood. It's just inherently not a left-wing position. So again, you guys, and I don't want to, I'm Australian, so it's different and different analysis and different culture, but you guys have been exposed to so much, I guess, anti-communist propaganda that, you know what I'm saying? Like, everything's off its axis a little bit. That was the thing that confused me too. Like I said, that classical European, Marx, J.S. Mill, all those sort of classics, they've sort of been redefined, and we're in different bubbles of just like what we learn. Like me and Dave Rubin both have the same degree, but he's speaking, you may as well be speaking Dutch, right? I mean, it's not the best example. But I'm just saying in general, like, it's once you get past the sort of thought terminating cliche stuff, and you get to the substance, it's actually like, well, classical liberalism, J.S. Mill was largely in support of socialism, and like, it's very straight. Adam Smith, it's just been a weird twist, and it's a lot of it is psyop stuff that you guys are just it's easily explained, but I don't want to go into it. Makes you sound like a nutter when yeah, you can easily attack this from the left. I know we went on a cancel culture, but I went on a deviation. Feel free to cut this out. But that's what, like, I've said this, right, which is that first of all, no socialist would do that. But this is the thing that's different between, say, Australia and the US, which is that when you lose your job there, you lose your healthcare, you lose your benefits. Like I learned recently with that, was it Frederick, what's his name, this week, that, and also with this is related to the vaccine mandate, that thing with the firing of healthcare workers for the vaccine, that I had no idea that unemployment insurance could be at the discretion of an employer. Like, that's insane to me. Like, at-will employment and these things are just because we've got a strong union tradition here. We've got strong, those sorts of things where cancel culture doesn't have, it is very cultural here. It's more like a shunning, because it's not you have rights here. I know that sounds crazy, but you can go to court, you can go to unfair dismissal, there's a process that you can follow that, employers have to follow these things. So there's those cultural gaps as well, which is that this is a uniquely neoliberal, dare I say, model, which is that it's just operant conditioning in the most extreme way, which is that it's just punishment for wrongthink, but the core issue is workers' rights, and the employers sneaking gross misconduct clauses into employee contracts that they can get rid of you at will, right? So that's where there's another cultural difference. Again, I know I've probably maybe swayed off topic, but I think that is actually root cause, which is okay. Whether you're Marxist or anarcho-capitalist, they're the same, right? That we agree on the same problem, which is corruption and misuse of power, abuse of power of corporations and government. And this thing is a very handy weapon used by tech companies, by Murdoch Press, all of those things. Murdoch's been at war with the internet history here as well, which is that Murdoch's been at war with the internet forever, and he's lost a shit ton of money on MySpace, and he's had a vendetta forever, and he's finally figured out a model where he has all of his papers arguing with each other for cash. Right? So when we're talking about root cause, we're talking about massive institutions, massive wealth punching down and using these kids who think they're doing the right thing, and bots, mostly bots, astroturfing and all that stuff. Learning to spot a bot is a big part of it. But also that, like the Frederick thing was an interesting one, because he was enabled. No one's turning on what was her name? What's her name? Emma's boss. Like, you get what I'm saying? They blame the canceller, not the boss who made the decision to act on that. The internet's going to internet. Cyberbullying. I've been cancelled since 1994 on a weekly basis. I've been cyberbullied and, had pizzas show up. That's just the nature of the internet. But grown-ups shouldn't be listening to this, or people in power should not be using this to be able to abuse power. And that's where my focus is, right? So.
Yeah, I'm very curious because Mack, you're an anarcho-capitalist, and I sort of brought up the connection between capitalism and our employment structure. And Téa, I'm glad you brought into the conversation the way that America invests a lot of power in its employers. That's something that I've thought, the left is supposedly so interested in, and then you kind of get to this weird space where it's weaponized. Mack, I'm very curious about your perspective as a libertarian, as a strong capitalist, on kind of the connection between capital and the sort of free market response of, okay, the Twitterati or the cancel crusaders, they essentially threaten a boycott of a company, and then that company says, my bottom line is going to be affected, so I need to get rid of this person who may not have even done anything wrong according to me. I'm very curious about your view on that, coming from your ideological standpoint.
Yeah, so it's actually very interesting. There's a huge debate. I just popped back onto the internet, and there's huge debate going on in libertarian circles that in my opinion, has needed to go on for a very long time. And that is, at what point do we as libertarians stop saying, but it's a private company, so they can just do what they want? And it's because, which us more right-wing libertarians actually get this, it seems, the people who don't understand that are the ones saying it's a private company, bro. They can do whatever they want, even if they destroy your life, whatever. It's like, oh, okay, well, if that's what libertarian is, I'm not it. But there's a big debate raging between the people that realize that what we're seeing is artificial hierarchy. These are not natural elite people who in a just system would rise to the top and be making good decisions for people and actually taking care of people, their workers and things like that. These are artificial elites propped up by the state that are destroying people's lives. And like Téa said, weaponizing young people and propagandizing them into quote unquote canceling people. And to me, that's it's got nothing to do with capitalism. It's corporatism. But I definitely think we agree on the fact that it's powerful people that are facilitating this. Because I think, and this is what bothers me about American conservatives, I can't speak for other places, But you're seeing all these American conservatives and Republicans say things like, oh, they're blaming the kids, like, oh, it's just these stupid kids, and it's like, no, that's not a good assessment either. You're like completely, it's like they're getting psyoped into believing that's the issue too. And don't get me wrong, I'm very passionate about education. I think getting kids out of public schools would help a lot in the US at least. But that's not the fundamental thing. And I think even if everybody homeschooled, there would still be this cancel culture thing, because there are these institutions everywhere. You can't turn on the TV without seeing this stuff everywhere. On every social media app you get on, there's people arguing about cancel culture, every subculture, it's everywhere. And it's because there's people behind the scenes. It's like the Wizard of Oz, propping it up, the man behind the curtain, whatever you want to call them behind the curtain. And that's where it's coming from. And that's why it's such a, I think that's why it's a issue everywhere. It's not like you can escape it somewhere. And I think that's why a lot of people get frustrated. And that's why it's kind of become such an overarching term, because it's almost like cancel culture has become the term that people throw on things when something's wrong and they don't know, they can't place their finger. It's kind of like normal people that aren't like online a lot. They'll just be like, oh, it's cancel culture. And it's like, well, I mean, kind of, but there's a lot behind that you're not.
It's actually unfair dismissal and censorship.
Exactly.
And
there's so much more than the cancel culture thing. So I don't think it's an unuseful term, but it's definitely, like we kind of talked about at the beginning, it's become like the catch-all, like, oh, well, they're just canceling. And it's like, okay, yeah, technically, but why are they doing it? That's what we need to get to the bottom of if we're going to get anywhere with actually changing why this is happening and to the extent that it's happening at. So.
Well, you mentioned J.K. Rowling just now, which so I actually was exposed to this. I've always studied the internet, social sciences of the internet, and I was sort of, this was a blind spot because I hadn't been on Twitter since Trump got elected, because Twitter just became so unpalatable and unbearable to use. Remember that first year after Trump was elected, and it was just, he was so dominant, and you couldn't, even if you got rid of him and weren't following him, it was just the Trump channel 24/7.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Like him or love him, I think everyone can I just use the F word for a minute and say, I think pretty universally everyone thinks Trump's a fuckwit, right? For the most part, right? I think internationally, I think even if you love fuckwits, we go, yes, that's a good word for him. But, it was just sort of, but there's a lot of complicated shit underneath that. However, but the blind spot was that people were arguing about stuff that they didn't really know about. So first of all, cancel culture was quite superficial, right? It was like the arguments were quite superficial. But one thing that I've observed is that it's not, I don't think it's even about what you say. I think it's about whether you are a target or a person of interest to whoever. It's now become something where this weird, with the internet, the MLM, it's like this weird Frankenstein's monster of sort of multi-level marketing, pyramid schemes, clout, celebrity culture, sports of like political sports, which is a very different cultural thing. Like America is crazy. It's like it's like cowboys versus, I don't even know I don't know what the names of the sport. I don't know sports, but people have replaced sports with blue and red. And I think that when you look at it from, say, the Australian point of view, where we have had there's a long history with this, which is this imposition. I don't think Americans, and again, I say that America as a nation and as a culture, not as a, individually, the dominance, the cultural dominance, the dominance of tech, the capitalist, the globalization, right? The imposition on our day that something like the American president has on a non-American culture, right? And so, and that's what I was going to say, actually. Sorry, the Libs of TikTok account and those things, right? Let's think about what teenagers have been through across the world have been through in the last 18 months. Like they've been disconnected from their friends. They're watching their family hurt. Maybe their parents lost their house. Maybe their parent, they've got this economic insecurity. They've got all this stuff, and they're mad and upset and confused, and they don't have the tools in which to express that anger. So that's going to happen. So something like the Libs of TikTok, yes, I think that it can be funny, but at the same time, I kind of go, oh, I'm not a fan of a kid who's clearly unwell being given, because the twisted thing about this, the celebrity culture and the online culture and the incentives, is that someone like, I forget, what's his name? I did a video on him, Frederick, what's his name, the last name? The guy, Frederick Joseph, here we go, get the names. Frederick Joseph, is that he got exactly what he wanted, which was everyone mad at him, okay? Everyone talking about him, promoting his book, okay? The people who are his base will still buy his book, will still do his, support him. And it's like, we don't, unless we talk about the incentives or the power structures that work with this stuff, cancel culture does become ultimately a meaningless term. And a lot of this stuff is really just the internet. The law and the systems haven't caught up. We've got boomers in charge who don't understand the internet. They're passing legislation on things like metadata where they don't understand the tech. And it's not necessarily about conspiracy. It's just it's possibly, I wouldn't say happenstance, because that makes it sort of accidental. It's more about how power structures work. And again, like the way that you, with capitalism, it's like, yeah, it's just very interesting to see how things are defined and not defined. And there's just, we're not even speaking the same language a lot of the time, which is because when I hear you guys talk about the left, like when you say conservatives, right? Australian conservatives are still to the left of your Democrats.
Oh yeah, I know.
But and what's funny is that I see this culture wars imposition on Australian politics. I don't know if you've seen, but apparently we've fallen into all.
Yeah, it's all over Twitter. You guys are a prison. You're now a prison colony. Congratulations.
It is the most boneheaded, I won't use the R word because I get in trouble, but the most boneheaded propaganda I have ever seen. It is ridiculous. Because one funny thing about Australia is that those supposed concentration camps,
Coof camps.
Our miners, the miners are the richest, like they're our 1%. People in high vis and like no teeth, they're our 1% because we're largely on farming and mining and in industry, right? They're rich. That's just a mining camp for like people who are like high income. It's a mining camp. And because the quarantine facilities were inadequately ventilated, they thought, let's give them open air. Let's go, you repurpose the mining camp. It's like, but to see it spun as like a constant, it's just bizarre. It's just upside down world most of the time. But I think a lot of this cancel culture stuff is the same thing. When you actually understand your politics and you understand your definitions and you understand history, which is that none of this is new. This is just cyberbullying, cyber stalking, all of this stuff. Boomers never, like I said, I've spent 20 years trying to get business to take the internet seriously and even care about their website. They've been asleep on the internet. And this is just coming home to roost because the bad guys, the Obama campaign and all those cynical political operators have refined a model over time it's basically the same as ISIS. It's the same tactics as radicalizing anyone else. And both government and corporations have been asleep on this. So they're seeing HR, corporate cops, see the opportunity to weaponize and use this thing to get rid of whoever they want. I mean, it seems like that's a more plausible scenario than any sort of, again, I know I've dominated the conversation, but I think that there's so much to unpack with just the definition of cancel culture alone. That's a whole conference. But a lot of people are talking around it and assuming that everyone has the same definition. Mm-hmm. I mean, you could talk for 2 hours about the history of Puritanism in the United States. Why you guys left the UK? Like, it's very interesting.
And now it's back and alive and well.
We can't cancel who we like. The US literally left the UK because they couldn't cancel people, right? It's in the DNA. I'm joking, but it's really, yeah. So I just come at it from a slightly different angle, which is the theory. And I feel like I've found myself in a weird position where I have to defend the left. I'm fighting for the left because I believe that they're imposters. And I believe that, it's actually just another version of just, again, like corporations being under pressure for corporate social responsibility. That was a big thing, and it's the buzzword in the 90s. Mm-hmm. You need to be environmentally conscious. But women started making noise, people of color started making noise, all of these things. And they went, well, okay, how can we do something without doing something? I know, branding. let's get our 23-year-old, because again, I've worked in branding and marketing. So I know that most of the corporate branding people are like 23, 24 years old. They go, oh yeah, let's put a rainbow on it. They don't understand the history. There's a big and complex history just with the internet and marketing alone. It's like this weird Frankenstein's monster of several different things. That cancel culture is kind of like a catch-all term. But I see mostly weaponized by the right as well. Like it's something that it's sort of overblown. Again, I think that a lot of the bad faith right wingers weaponize this in order to discredit the left and destroy the left. Like, I don't know if people know downwind what the policy impact of something like critical theory is, like the critical theory stuff, which is that the universities in Australia, they're using the critical theory boogeyman to destroy the humanities. Like there's the humanities departments are being just had open war declared on them. And I go, well, that's a bit fucked, isn't it? And it's like that downwind thing from this massive like cyclone on Twitter has real consequences sort of in policy and down the line. So it's working. Whatever it's supposed to be doing, it's working.
Yeah, there is a tendency for there's something that is very unique to particularly American Republicans. I'm glad you brought up how conservatives are very, very different in the UK and Australia, in other parts of the West.
Oh, they're far right.
Yeah. American Republicans have a tendency to also really pick up on things that maybe classical liberals are discussing in the sort of like, I know it's not really called the intellectual dark web anymore, but whatever that space is, to the extent that it exists, they pick that up like a year later, and then they say, this is a really good marketing opportunity for us. You'll see this with Ted Cruz,
it's the boomers again.
Yes. So you get boomer Republicans who come in with cancel culture is something we can talk about at the Republican National Convention to get votes. And then they totally butcher it. Yeah.
Well, what's so funny? Oh, I was just going to say, what's so funny to me about, we call them conservative Inc. here. It's like the little think tanks like TPUSA and that in the United States that are helping students be conservative and all that. It's so hilarious because so my friends and I that are like, hey, we're right-wing libertarians, we look at them and we're like, you guys, have you sat down and talked to someone that you're attacking for being left? Because you literally agree on everything. It's just how you're going about things and how you're branding yourself that's different. So I'm glad I feel like one way to fight is to criticize like the conservative Inc. people, which libertarians do that. And then it's like, stop attacking your allies. It's like, neither of you guys are my allies. You're all crazy. You're just repeating propaganda points that have been fed to you by God knows who. So it's always funny to see like older Republicans and their takes, like kind of Scott brought up, like a year later, like this culture war thing that's caught on. I'm like, yeah, this has been happening for 5, 6, maybe a decade. Where have you people been? Like,
it's been going for 100 years.
Right. And now all of a sudden you people are, oh no, the ship, the country's burning down. It's like, yeah, it's been burning down. Where have you been?
It's based that. This is why when I say it's still McCarthyism, right? Is the history around sort of conservatives and teenage culture and using that as we're going to the dogs, damn it. That's been around forever, right? The hippies, like, remember the 70s with the hippies, the civil rights movement, all of these things. There's always been that reactionary like aspect. And a big part of that strategy is to make the left look like they're dismantling society. Right. And that's why early on, it was just a blind spot, because I think with the internet, that cross-cultural exchange, there was some confusion, I think, for me, because because I think there's not many political scientists, people don't know the theory, like the fundamental foundational stuff. Marx and Adam Smith largely agreed. Anarcho-capitalists, libertarian Marxists largely agree. We agree on the what, we agree on the problem. Yeah, see, I'm saying if you're actually a Marx scholar, you contextualize it and you understand he was critiquing that not as a false dichotomy between the two, but as a yes and. It's not or, it's and, right? These things, right? So that's where they all work together. JSML, it's ideas, not tribes. And this is where like we would probably largely agree on 95% of things, probably disagree on the model of or how you organize, but I think both models are insufficient for something where 7 billion people need to coexist together on one space. I think that that's just not realistic to be able to have one catch-all system for 7 billion people, right? Like the internet. Well, actually, it's more like 3 billion because half of the world don't have access. But
and a couple other billion have been banned already, and they're just ghosts. Their accounts are still up, but they're not there.
Yeah, but it's not just a war on the right. If you see what's happening to the anti-war and anti-imperialist left, you'll see what war looks like. In terms of censorship and stuff. It's like it's most of the right wingers still have some platform, but the left, like these guys. Assange sits there as an example, as a constant example of what happens when you actually tell the truth about things.
It's disgusting. We can't talk about that because you will get banned off YouTube. Because I will get angry.
but one thing I like to do is, with cancel culture is that one way maybe to move it forward is that, focusing more on what we have in common and what we agree on and what universal principles. I think people objectively know, like I did joke about the fuckwit thing, right? But most people can just identify when someone is a fuckwit. It's not ideological. It's just someone being a fuckwit. And it's the same thing, like murder is probably wrong. You can't rationalize those things. And I think people can use ideology to rationalize whatever they want to do. If you're a good person, I can rationalize myself into kindness and I can rationalize myself into not, or being a bully. And I think that that's just, it comes back to the psychology of this stuff. But people are in pain. Especially in the last 18 months, people are traumatized. They've had, their lives pulled out. I think I wrote a joke. I said, look, 7 billion people during a pandemic, all on the same internet. I think it's going well, considering when you think about it that way. I think it's actually going well. When you know how early the internet is, how bad the law is, how untrustworthy our leaders are, I think, again, we can agree that leaders are letting us down, right? Our government are letting us down. Ideologically, it's how we organize what the solution is for debate. But the things that we can agree on are leaders have really shown who they are during this last 18 months, right? A lot of politicians and business people. So you get what I'm saying? So I think there's more about, let's get to the common stuff, rather than this tribal war of this constant warring between tribes online.
Yeah, I think
that's going to happen. It's always going to happen.
Yeah, I think that this is a good point because we've kind of alluded, I think we're getting to this point where we're realizing in this conversation that if you leave it to the teams, if you leave it to team red and team blue, it is just this endless cycle of, okay, somebody does something that isn't good for us as a society. And then the other team totally makes it worse. Finds a way to put it into this sort of rhetorical semantic game and turn it into kind of a sport. And then the truly heterodox people, the whistleblowers, if you will, the people that want to get to the bottom of things and actually cause solutions, just end up silenced in the process because they're not scoring any points, right? They're not putting any points on the board. So
there's no money in it.
Yeah. So I want to ask you both along these lines, how do you think, is there a way for the real thinkers here, the truly heterodox people who aren't on team red or team blue, is there a way for them to kind of wrest some control over the conversation back? Because everybody in general knows there's a consensus, certainly in the United States, and I assume around the Western world, that political leaders suck, that the media sucks, that we have to kind of look to ourselves to solve a lot of these problems. And yet there hasn't been so much movement, even though you always hear about the silent majority. People know there's some kind of something going on with freedom of speech. Everybody knows. Everyone knows there are things I could say 10 years ago I can't say now that I still believe strongly but cannot say. 5 years ago, 2 years ago, right? They've seen this movement. There is supposedly this silent majority, but how is it that we can end that cycle of just endless point scoring, which does less than nothing, and actually, I don't know, use the institutions of democracy, right? Like we have a democratic system in these countries to, well, so that's my question is, what do we do? Can we do it in the system that we have? Like, how do we wrest control over this conversation, particularly as it pertains to free speech and cancel culture, because it is so important and it impacts so many people? How do we get in there as a people, as the public? How do we get a word in edgewise when it seems like if you combine the power of the media and the politicians and the big tech, they just find a way to keep us out of it?
Oh, there's a lot there. I don't know. I think especially, I mean, everybody, I feel like, and it's easy too over the last 18 months, become all doom and gloom and like, oh, it's all burning down and we're never going to be a country again, especially the United States, all this like national divorce talk and things like that. And it's really easy to do, especially when you're on social media. And it's like Téa said, they're posting videos of goof camps and, oh, people are being locked in their houses and all this. Of course you're going to be doom and gloom and think there's no solution and that cancel culture is never going to go away and all these things. And it might not, but I don't know, as a libertarian anarcho-capitalist, I'm like, okay, cool, we don't have to live together. Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this at all? It's especially in the United States. I mean, I can't speak to elsewhere, but I think some places in Europe too, there's been a fracturing of culture basically between people who, whether they actually agree or not, because I do generally believe some people are fighting and they shouldn't be fighting, but they're choosing to fight and they probably agree with more than they realize. But then there are people who legitimately don't agree. And that's fine. We don't have to live together. A poll just came out for the United States. I think it's almost 50% of voters on either side, the red side and the blue side, are like, okay, cool, let's go. Like, let's split it up. We're good. Like, we don't want to live with these people. Cool. Like, why are we doing that? Like, we shouldn't have to do that. And I think that's part of the problem is you have powers that be. And that I saw some libertarians defending Abraham Lincoln and I almost lost it. I almost got banned from Twitter because I'm like, we literally do not have to live together. We are being told we have to live together and sing kumbaya with people that, even if we just believe we disagree and we don't, who cares? Even if you're wrong about disagreeing with someone, if you don't want to be around someone, you shouldn't have to be around someone. Why are we doing this? And I think that's a big reason why cancel culture is right now. And it could be just people have been isolated for 18 months, kind of like Téa touched on with the kids that are on TikTok. I mean, yeah, you lock yourself or be isolated and not be able to see your friends for 18 months. And you see how mentally stable you are. Travel back to when you were like 16 and try that out and you see what happens. But we don't have to do that. So like everybody, libertarians too, there's some libertarians saying we just need to unify and it's fine, like we can all get along. And it's like, okay, but why? Like if we can't get along, why don't we just go our separate ways? And like it doesn't have to be violent. There's all these conservatives like, all right, let's go, especially in America. That's how we do, that's how we roll. We're like, let's go, get the guns.
Yeah, you guys are a lot more aggressive.
It's like, calm down. It's like that.
You don't pick your battles.
No, it's like, I don't know if you've ever seen that meme of like, it's like Britain or Canada talking bad and they're like, shh, America's going to hear you. And then America like busts through the wall and it's like, America. It's like,
and that's what it's like all day, every day on social media. So like, and I feel this thing where it started, with Halloween. I was like, stop making me yell at children at my door. And it's like, we don't have Halloween here. Stop calling it candy and soda. I have to keep fighting against this like hegemonic force all the time. But it's I find it's very fascinating to hear you speak because I see these systems and I think maybe a lot of it is down to, political literacy, the stats, right, are generally low. Okay. Civics is something that you just learn that you've got to vote.
Yep.
And I wish that there was more emphasis placed on really understanding the system rather than worshipping it, which is a very different thing, but understanding how they got there, how these systems work, because I actually have a much more optimistic view of, first of all, how robust some of these systems are, right? I actually truly, like, again, we are an individualist culture, but not as, like, you guys are batshit. I'm sorry. You're just batshit individualist. It's the thing we love about you, right? It's a love-hate thing. It's like that uncle that's drunk. You wouldn't not invite him because he's entertaining, but he's, like, God, man, he's picking fights.
America is the racist uncle at your family reunion.
Yeah, we love you.
Better or worse.
But also, but for me, like, again, I'm a big fan of like the common law system. When you look at like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of case law, like you've got the government, right, which passes legislation, but the courts and the justice system, yes, there's massive gaps, but it improves over time, and it's case by case basis, and it interprets. There's a constantly self-correcting, and I think that maybe this might just be a big, like the internet is kind of a mass correction of some of these things. I sit there and I go, how much can it withstand? As someone who's like studied these things and understand, well, we don't have free speech for a start. We have implied freedom of expression, political expression, and, you know, a number of interlocking different rights through case law, which are basically one and the same as having a Bill of Rights. But I think that Australia has freedom of speech in practice and in our culture and as convention. And this is something that you guys struggle because you have it written down, but don't necessarily practice it. And that's what I think, that democracy is practice. And one of the things is that a lot of the people arguing on the internet have never been to a meeting. They've never been to it. Haven't done a policy consultation. They haven't participated really a lot in a meaningful way in politics. They've got a lot of opinions on it, but not necessarily, you know what I'm saying? Like, I think that to answer the question in a very convoluted way is that participating in something other than Twitter, don't talk about it, turn up to a branch meeting. Like, I haven't turned up to things because of this gender thing, and I didn't want to destroy, you know, any chance of getting rid of the Conservative government. But, you know, but generally turning up, participating in these things, that's how you use your voice, use your vote, learn how the system works, and like exercise that to the maximum of, you know, like, and yes, YouTube and Twitter and all that stuff, yes, it's fine. But at the end of the day, like, there's only money in rhetoric, and there's only money in being a propagandist for either side. The second that because I've been critical of the woke left, and the MAGAs love bomb me, and like was starting all this stuff and throwing, and I just like, I'm not interested in that. Like, it's not my thing. I still come at this from the left. I'm fighting for the mischaracterization of every philosopher that I ever loved. But it's just I think that a lot of it is about participation and not listening to propaganda, understanding, like media literacy, understanding that the media and the internet is bullshit, full of MLM cults, scammers. It's gone. Like the bait and switch that we had. Like, I don't know how long have you been on the internet, Mac? You guys, when did you guys first get on the internet and Twitter?
My Twitter Twitter would be 2009.
Okay, so you know the bait and switch that occurred.
Facebook
then, right?
since like 2008, 2009. Yeah.
Okay.
Which is terrifying because I was like 14, 15, but you know.
Okay, so I've been on the internet since 1994. Okay, yeah. 27 years. And when it first happened, I'm fucking, in my day, we had an onion on my belt. But it really is, this is what my book's about. This is what I'm writing about now, which is that switch. There was a massive, so 2001 was 9/11 was a massive turning point for a lot of things. Like you had initially you had the DMCA and the RIAA going to war with the internet. You had Murdoch going to war with the internet. All of those sorts. That wasn't in 2001. I'm saying this. I'm very, very quickly trying to skim history, but there was this massive, like I call it Americans Online. AOL.com was the really big turning point where they had the portal. Initially, it was like a number of different web rings and a number of, you know, everyone was sort of decentralized. That's why I laugh at the crypto bros where they go, we're going to make a decentralized internet. I said, yeah, good luck. We did. And they fucked it. Like that's the forces that keep like trying to take over these things because they want to control information and you know, and limit like access to information. And when I say what you call the deep state, I just call the US government. But it's just,
I mean, they are essentially the same thing, to be fair.
Yeah, exactly. They're one and the same. But you know, there's this whole history where we had the decentralized internet, we had the freedom, we had that, but then over time, Facebook took over, Google took over, and there's that constant, it's just that sort of boiling frog situation where now all of our, it's basically the same problem over again, which is musicians had a chance to make their own money and do their own thing. The RIAA went, fuck that shit. We're not. The record labels went, nah, we're not doing that. Big four. Okay. It's always a big four. No matter what it is, it turns into a big four. And now it's just a tech company doing the same thing. So it's just the same. I think it's just a repetition. I think it's just because people don't They think the internet's new. Like there was this trope when the internet first started that the internet's not real life. The internet's different. I can be someone else online. I don't have to be myself. I was on the internet anonymously. I was all of those things. And then, but I wrote about this last week, actually. I said, it's really funny how I wrote my diary on the internet in 1994 because I thought it was a secret. Because there was no one on there. My mum wasn't on there. And you get what I'm saying? That's where the deal shifted. And that's where I think, but like I said, I've been cancelled like how many million times over. It's not, it's the same. It's internet bullying. It's cyber stalking. It's cyber bullying. It's just not something that I think is necessarily new. Sorry, I know that I've derailed this conversation. But there's a lot of history there that I think, that's why with the cancel culture, it's not new. Like it's just the same thing to me. So.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, when was I doxxed? End of 2015, beginning of 2016, like right before Trump got elected. And that was when I was like a baby libertarian. They're private companies. I'm fine. Like I'm just making YouTube vlogs literally in my state where anyone can see where I live. Woo! Great idea. Like no one's going to see that.
Yeah.
Did not understand essentially the implications, which is insane. But you know, I was a lot younger. I was still in college. And I just thought, well, I'm doing stuff for liberty. Who's going to disagree with that? And some 38-year-old teacher from Michigan decided that he was a member of Antifa and he was going to dox me because people should know where fascists sleep, because I was really fascist as like a 22-year-old rolling around a free speech ball on a college campus. Yep, that's fascism. You got me. You got me, buddy. And at that point, that's when I started to go, oh, people can see me. People like, so that was my first experience. But I mean, you're right. That was obviously way more recent but it's been around since the internet. I mean, I remember being on MySpace and there was actually a girl, I don't think it was in my state. I think it was a few states over, but she ended up, she's no longer on this earth. We'll just put it that way. I don't want to get anything taken down. And it was because someone's mother logged and made a fake MySpace and was bullying this poor girl. And that's what happened. This was in like the early or the mid to late 2000s. I think that would have been MySpace. I mean, that I was literally a child. Like this has been happening and that would be certainly cancel culture, I would think. But so it's been happening for a long time. I'm surprised everyone's not like, it's kind of been interesting to see, there's been a lot of people saying, we should just take the TED pill. Everybody go off the internet. Uncle Ted was right. Ted Kaczynski, just get off the internet. I mean, maybe not with his methods, but I mean, the internet is probably a mistake. I think we can all agree. Let's just step back. But the problem is it's Pandora's box. We can't do that. It's just not realistic.
They said that about the printing press too.
Exactly.
And and they worked through all of that. Did you know this about the UK and the US? That the reason why the UK has such codified manners, you know how they've got all these like codified etiquette where you must put your foot, and like that was because there was a public debate with the Spectator in the newspaper at the time, because everyone was printing stuff that the Puritans didn't like. And so there was a public, it's actually really interesting to go back through history and go, okay, 18th century England, the printing press, they had a public conversation in the paper about what was and was not okay or appropriate. And I think I honestly feel that we're just figuring out new like cultural norms, like there's different law. Like in Australia, we've got Aboriginal and Indigenous population, right? And our police somewhat respect customary law, right? Which is that spearing and what all that sort of stuff. And so I know, but it's customary law, right? And again, I'm being very brief, but obviously you don't not get charged for spearing somebody. I'm saying
that's how it is with
they try to incorporate that when sentencing. When sentencing, it's a mitigating factor, right? Cultural differences. And I think that again, because I'm doing postgrad now in psychology of this stuff, because that was a big gap for me, was the actual psychological research. It is so lacking. There is, I've got like the school are going, stay, we need people to figure this problem out, because people are ill-equipped, because the psychology there's a whole bunch of collisions of social psychology interface, like with technology, depersonalisation, the economic and power forces, all of this stuff, addiction. Okay, so a lot of this stuff, internet addiction, when you look at the stats, right? it's more like, it's not so much that social media is causing harm. That's a very general statement. It's that, like alcohol or sex or anything like that, there's going to be that portion of the population who can't use things without fucking up their lives.
Yep.
And it's showing that that's having roughly the same impact. Same thing with TikTok. It's that 7 to 10%. And usually people who are vulnerable, and especially with something like the internet, where it's largely sort of people that are originally socially isolated or, reaching out. So you've got parasocial psychology on top of that. You've got celebrity worship. It's like I said, when I say it's a cluster, like a Frankenstein's monster of a lot of things, it's a lot of stuff, right? And so cancel culture manifests, and that's where it's like, well, no, the adults need to actually adult and say, actually, no, the responsibility lies with employers. And also and if you're in business, I've got a clause in my contract that says, a cancel culture clause in my contracts with my clients, and vice versa, that if this happens, that, we got each other's back. And that's the law, and systems have to evolve, and they haven't evolved in lockstep with the technology. And I mean, we're exposed to the whole world. I get to talk to you today without a diplomat in the room, or without any passport, or without, you know what I mean? Like we've just, again, I'm more in defense of probably regulation and law than say an anarcho-capitalist. But at the same time,
Maybe.
I think, but I actually believe that I think both sides of these, the only thing that we disagree on is which 10% are the bad guys, and I think that that's one of the big misunderstandings, not to be all theoretical, but Marxism has a blind spot for lazy people, and simplistically speaking, and capitalism has a blind spot for evil, psychopathic people who fuck up the system in both ways. And I think that it's that kind of finding that way in the middle that that works better. Every ideology has blind spots. No, there's no one single worldview that will ever fit for most people. And politics is largely linked to like personality and psychology. A lot of it's genetic. You're going to be left wing.
We have there's another debate, kind of, it's so funny, so much of this is touching on what's going on right now in like libertarian, like anarcho-capitalist circles. There's this huge debate right now, and I've been pissing all sorts of people off with it, because I'm like, hey guys, back. Well, I'm just gonna piss everyone off. We've identified a problem, which, like you said, ideologies have blind spots, is a lot of people, and I think this is with many things online probably, they're already living in an anarcho-capitalist society in their brains. So when you point out something like, for example, hey, if Facebook is a private company, according to you, right, and they're kicking you off, what do? You're not going to be on there. You're going to defend them doing that. When if you look at the history of Facebook was essentially started by the US government, the history of it. It's not a private company. But libertarians at surface level, kind of like you were saying, and this happens a lot. People just get surface level slogans like taxation is theft and things like that. And they just spew it out. They don't look into the history of anything. No. And they just say things that feel nice. And I'm kind of touching on going back to what you're saying about getting involved. That is that over the past 2 years, probably, I have evolved so much on that, because I did used to be one of those people. And there are a lot of libertarians that are like this, like, if you vote, you're consenting to slavery and like things like that. It's like, shut up. What? Like, and I hate democracy. Like, don't even get me started. It's mob rule. But I would not vote if they're going to raise my taxes locally. I don't like taxes. They're going to raise them. I will vote against it. How is that me being a slave? I'm literally voting in what I believe are my best interests. And so something a lot of libertarians this past 18 months has been like a big wake up call. Like, you have to get involved, especially locally. Federally, after what happened this election, we're all kind of like, wait a minute, what's going on here? But locally, people will say, oh, you can't make change. I'm like, you're an idiot. Yes, you can. I just went on a few months ago and just made a post. Like, there's been all these talks about mandates and things because of what's been happening. And I just made a post saying, hey, like, I'm potentially putting together like a get together. We're going to march on the Capitol, like, potentially, if they try to do this. Who wants to join me? And to their credit, I know we've been kind of trash talking the boomers. A lot of boomers were like, yeah, let's go. And then a lot of boomers were like, you're an idiot. What are you doing? But still, like, I think one good thing about the doom and gloom of what's been happening is a lot of people on all sides, quote unquote, and all ideologies are going, okay, clearly someone has to get involved. And they might not be able to put a finger on who's pulling the strings, but I think that's where we come in and we say, okay, here's who's pulling the strings. Let's try to come up with some solutions and actually do something instead of just sitting there like you said, like I have said Twitter is not real life because it's not. But I think a big problem with Twitter and where I'm coming from on that is people use social media, and this is one of the worst things about it, as a substitute. And like getting offline,
and it
for
informs
like
the
10
narrative.
months, exactly. Me getting offline for like almost 10 months. I will not thank them for doing that to me, but it was a really good perspective and wake-up call when you are terminally online, as I like to call it, and you're constantly seeing all these negative things. I think I would be in a way worse place if the good stretch of the last 18 months I had been online. And instead I'm not. And I'm coming back like, okay, guys, here's the solutions. Let's do these things. And they're all like, no, just give in. And I'm like, you guys are idiots. What are you talking about? I have been offline. People local to me are like, they're not down with this stuff either. Like, we can still do something. And so there's this weird, like, it like warps your brain, even like adults. It's not just kids, it's doing this too. Like if you're too online and you use it as a substitute instead of going out there and, like you said, get, no matter what country you're in, like get involved locally, see what you can do, what bills are about to be passed, even in your state. Like if you asked me like a year ago, like, hey, what bills are going to be passed in your state? I'd be like, oh, I don't know, screw the government, right? Like that's not helping anybody.
Democracy is hard work.
That's not helping anybody.
Yes.
And like, I might not like the system, but that doesn't mean we can't, at least part of our strategy has to be to attempt to use the system to further our goals. Because you can say all you want, screw you, I'm not using the system. But if you're not using the system, somebody else is. And you might not probably like what they're going to do with it. So.
And also, I think most people don't know how many decisions, especially at the low levels of government, are made with 8 to 10 people in the room.
Yes. Yeah. Just counsel people that, like,
how many times
you might have elected, but you're like, I don't really know who they are. Yeah. They're making those decisions.
Yeah, you get elected unopposed most of the time if you go and run at these things.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether that applies there because you guys are, but I think a lot of this stuff is back to basics. Learn how the system works, turn up. And yes, I know it's less fun and gives you less dopamine and you have to put pants on.
Dopamine.
But you know, again, I think, but it's just really people. I know we're talking about cancel culture because it's more broad than that. But if you have, but it's very much linked to if you've got networks on the ground. If you've actually got foundations, you're less cancelable too, because you then have people who they don't have a caricature of you who they are, because people depersonalize. If you've got these relationships, like for me, my online stuff doesn't matter because I can just make a call and I just laugh and people go, what? You only got that many followers. I go, yeah, but people will take my call. You get what I'm saying? Like, and eventually if you're involved and you actually understand the system and how it works, you feel a lot more empowered. And I think that feeling empowered means that you are less likely to cancel people because the psychology of that, to come back to what motivates people to cancel is, you know, I empathize with people who feel that way. That yes, there are obviously there's the dark personalities, right? The dark tetrad, right? They're going to do that. We need to have most of the systems that exist in any society are around psychopaths, sociopaths, people, rent seekers, right? People who exploit other people. That's what's happening. And it's just that we haven't caught up. But for most people are just lashing out, especially at the moment. I mean, it feels like I have a vastly different experience of social media than I think most people is. I just see a fire hose of just trauma and pain all the time.
Oh yeah.
Like people bully, and you know, bullies were bullied generally, you know.
Yeah, it's mostly projection. Even like the kids, even like the nasty kids that are calling themselves socialists living in giant houses, and it's like, you're richer than me and I'm an adult, but okay. Yeah. It's most of the time like their parents are divorced, they're not paying attention, like and even with adults, like I switched to, like, right before I got kicked off, talking about like family issues and stuff like that, because it's very important to culture. Most of the people I've joked with my husband, a lot of the people who had me blocked on Twitter, I will later find out and not laugh at it. I'll be genuinely sad for them. They had like very traumatic childhoods or their parents were divorced at a young age. And like, I have cousins that, you know, parents are divorced and just general things like that. And you're like, okay, now I see where you're coming from. Now, when I tweeted that thing about single moms, I understand why you were so angry and you were like, you should be canceled just for saying that, even though it's true. That's where you were coming from. That's why you're angry. And I think localism and getting involved in the cancel culture thing is actually, it's a great point. It's so involved. The more you have skin in the game, so to speak, the more you're going to think before you decide. Like you said, you're going to think before you decide to do something like that, because you might actually know the person in real life. Like if I go to like a council meeting or something in the US to like oppose something, and I see a lady get up and start, you know, yelling at the politicians, and someone's recording her and they post like the clip on social media and people are canceling her, I can go, hey, I was there. She's very nice. These were her concerns. This is not correct. And a bunch of other people hopefully were there too and can say, yeah, you guys are blowing this out of proportion. This is not what happened. Instead of like the short viral clip that no one really knows the context and we just decide things. And
Don't
then
worry,
it gets
they still
fun.
don't listen.
Oh, I know, but
I tried to tell them that we're not a fascist dictatorship in Australia and they wouldn't listen. I had to research my own country.
I heard you're putting people in boxcars. That's what I heard.
Apparently.
Yeah, I think this is one of the most important parts of the conversation, that it can't be overstated. And so it is inevitably understated, which is how hard it has been for humanity to adjust to the internet, which in every single aspect, there are so many different things to become addicted to and to become pathologized by and to have impact your mental health. I mean, there's the whole separate issue that we won't get into of like pornography addiction, giving every single 14-year-old boy on the planet unlimited access to all of that stuff at once for free, as much as they want, has definitely given them an idea of how they want to live their life. I think that it affects views on domination and submission in particular, not just in a sexual way, but in a broader social context for men and women. And then also social media, I think, kind of vaguely connected. I think it has presented it presents, you know, good opportunities and bad opportunities, but it messes with people's brains in terms of how they generate self-esteem. Because it's not just about, you know, posting the best aspects of your life. That's been done to death. People discuss that. It's also about, how do I make myself feel like a good person? How do I make myself feel like I'm a part of something bigger and like I'm, you know, beating a bad guy? Right? Because you grow up watching all the movies and reading all the books, doing all the things. There's always a hero and a bad guy. You want to be the hero. If you have even remotely normal psychology as like a 5-year-old kid, you want to be the good guy.
Deadpool,
right? Some people want to be, well, he's kind of anti-hero, but
I'm a Deadpool.
Yeah. At the end of the day, you want to have that sense that you're a part of something bigger and that you're going to be on that crusade. And that aspect of the psychology, and I like that we're getting into this because I think the psychology of it is so important to dissect. That aspect is the normal part. There's the healthy normal part where people want to defeat evil. Like that is part of humanity's story, of the individual experience. But the part that is so not normal, there's nothing normal about this, is the obsession with finding people that you don't know, and if it weren't for the internet, never would have known existed, who have not done anything to you or anyone you know, and wanting to destroy them. Yeah. That is something that if you engage in that activity, maybe if it's something you do from time to time, because it's like a really big one, like there's somebody who's just getting hit by everybody, you might be a somewhat normal person psychologically. But if you're the kind of person that is habitually doing this day after day, I would compare it to any other addiction, whether it be alcohol, drugs, pornography, whatever it is, where you are engaging. And
the research is starting to show that too. Yeah. So it's actually validating a lot of our gut feelings on this stuff. So.
Yeah. There's this, I'm so fascinated by the mentality of a person that goes onto the internet every day and thinks, how can I take these niche ideas that, you know, originated on like Tumblr 10 years ago or something and get someone fired over it? You know, like, and it's, again, it's people they don't know.
Yeah. But that's actually not, it's not actually even a conscious thing. We're so much less this is what rational choice theory is not really a good foundation for like deciding things, but that's a whole other thing. But we're a lot less rational than we think, right? A lot of this stuff we are driven by our situation, genes, personality dispositions, lots and lots of different things, right? And I think that, yes, that is the most destructive part of that, right? But also when you've got power that exploits that, that's actually the thing that I'm more focused on, because it leads into, because I worked in user experience design for most of my career, right before I quit tech in Outrage. And I've been in these rooms with these guys, right? And this is where the censorship argument becomes complex, because I've gone from child protection to user experience to, like the gatekeeping idea that you were talking about before, like how do you protect people? How do you protect young brains? How do you protect people from propaganda, knowing full well that it's not just one country, it's not Russia, it's everyone is using the same tactics, the same playbook, it's actually everyone's accusing everyone else of doing the exact, it's like marketers who,
when they're collaborating most
doing
of the
black
time.
hat, you're doing black hat, no, you're all doing black hat, stop lying, right? The only people who don't do black hat are people who quit marketing like me. So it's, you get what I'm saying? Like that, it's now become so embedded in the tactics that are just, like the Obama model and all those other models of recruiting and marketing. We need to rethink. These guys aren't doing it deliberately. Okay, it's not. So I actually have to be more charitable. That especially that's why I'm more understanding of people like Zuckerberg and Jack, because having made tech products, having designed tech products, this was a blind spot for me too. I kind of had some feelings about data and privacy with insurance companies where they were talking about life events and being able to, do stuff. But most people that I talked to were excited about the tech and the possibilities, but this was just a big blind spot that we made assumptions about human behavior, right? That people were okay. That everyone that was using the internet,
people are not okay.
Exactly. And I think that was, and I even just studying this for sort of 4 years, and now the last year, I actually came to this thing where I went, shit, I need to go and study psychology because there's a big part missing here. Yes, I understand some of it, but I need to get into the nitty gritty here and really do research, because this stuff has fucked up our brains, and we didn't even realize it. Because when you work in the industry and you work over there, you're kind of doing these, you're trying to get engagement, you're trying to increase attention, you're trying to, I know Tristan talks about this Tristan, what's his name? Talks about this quite a bit, but the slot machine stuff. Mm-hmm. But it was it was intended to make Kim Kardashian. It wasn't intended to make Donald Trump or you get what I'm saying? Like it was intended for a specific purpose. And what happened was that this playbook jumped the road into politics, and it's gone. It's just, yeah. You get what I'm saying? I'm trying to be charitable to those.
It's the story of like every dystopian novel ever.
Yeah.
People create it. They create a technology. There's like, we have the technology, and then something happens that takes hold of it, and it spreads like a wildfire. And all of a sudden, the creators are like, "Whoa!"
Yeah.
And then somebody gets a hold of it that is not good natured, that knows exactly how to exploit those things. Like Google's motto was "Don't be evil." What? Yeah. Google is literally Skynet now. Like, what do you mean? Don't be evil? I can tell you why
that changed. I can tell you how that changed. So when you're a startup, if you're in the startup scene in tech, right? I've worked with a number of these things, and I've created products myself. So, but when in that scene, there is, and you would know quite a few of these libertarian tech types. Mm-hmm. There is something fundamentally in their personality that has to have these blind spots about how it can go wrong.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you wouldn't succeed. You won't get funding. There's a
because that's what keeps driving them. Like, keep trying, even though you're failing. Yeah. Try whatever. Let's create this awesome thing.
And that's why they need annoying people like me in the room, even though they ignored me at the time. But I'm saying they reject that. There's something about that culture of, that American dream stuff where it's kind of, if you have to be deliberately have those blind spots in order to even contemplate starting something like this, because it's very hard. You get what I'm saying? So like it's entrepreneurship is actually inherently built without protection around what might go wrong. It's kind of like sorry, I know.
Well, because I get what you're saying. Like if an entrepreneur knew every single thing that could potentially If they knew
Yeah.
every single thing that could potentially go wrong, they might say, oh, we can't do this. What if this happens?
Yes. I wouldn't
And then
want to be
nothing
Mark
would ever get
Zuckerberg.
done. Oh,
I would not
want
want to be Jack. Have you seen Jack lately?
Yeah, he looks not looking so good.
That's what I'm saying.
He looks like he's president of the United States. He is not doing good.
No, and Zuckerberg has a different protective layer there, but I see it because I think when you've met enough of these guys, you go, that's a broken man who has tried. And also, I know some of the design teams in tech, right? And they're sitting there trying to fix the problem with more tech. They're so it's so frustrating. It's funny, but wrong. But they're just like, you see them we tried to reduce friction and, frictionless experience. That was the big word of the day. Make it so that there's no friction for the customer so they can do what they want. But if you apply that to politics, ethically, you need to put some friction back in. You need to go, it's like, there's a little too little friction. I think maybe we need to put some back. And that's kind of what's happening, I think, but that's where that censorship argument, like you said, becomes simplistic. Like this free speech absolutist idea, it's not realistic. Because you do expose children to these things, and it's not like, oh, let somebody think of the children. This is a real conflict in terms of safety, in terms of
literally someone please think
ethical
of the children.
guidelines. Yeah, my whole mission has always been about ethical frameworks for digital. Like that's and no one listens or cares because they're just all about the money. But I'm just saying, like, you just got the bad guys took over because it was unregulated and continues to be, and it's just, I don't know. You have to be a free speech absolutist. Yes, politically, maybe. But in technology, I think it's a different conversation because there is an actual velocity, immediate harm that can be done. There's those other, they're really complex. And this is where I find it quite simplistic. That's why the cancel culture thing, when I say it depends, which is like, I'm not absolutist about it, which is that I think that this is going to be a controversial view, but I think Donald Trump being removed there's a complexity there because there was, you get what I'm saying? I think that we have to the only thing is to just recognize complexity, have empathy and get involved and try the best you can. But I think people who are making simplistic arguments and absolute arguments for a time that is actually needing a new framework and a new way of thinking, which is global 7 billion or 3 billion people with smartphones.
Well, even like with just using Trump as an example of like, you have to have some complexity. Like being in libertarian circles, there were plenty of libertarians screeching, saying orange man bad, just like people on, in the Democratic Party in the US were doing. And at first, sure, you get sucked into it, but then you're like, okay, wait. This man is making, I said, this man is what else have you got? I'm tired of talking about. I mean, for God's sake, they're still talking about him. Just shut up. He's gone. Like, he's just writing letters every now and then. Just ignore him. If it's like, ignore him, he will go away. I promise. Maybe. Well, we at least won't have to see him on the news. We'll just put it that way. But he did piss off the media. And I think he exposed the American media more than anyone has in a very, very long time, which was good. But if you have this simplistic view, like orange man bad, orange man my savior, you're not going to see that. You're just going to see good or bad. Like there has to be complexity of things. It's the same thing with cancel culture. Like, I have heard there are Facebook groups that are targeting young children and grown ass men are in the Facebook groups. I'm not going to say, hey, free speech, don't ban that Facebook group. That's disgusting. Yes, censor them. I don't care that you don't have free speech when it comes to that. I'm sorry, that's disgusting. Like you said, protect the children kind of thing.
I think this gets into a really important point that gets lost. So as you're saying, there's this oversimplification in this debate that happens on the side of the people who are actually they're not denying cancel culture. They're acknowledging it and trying to solve it, but then they end up taking the free speech absolutist stance. And the problem with that is literally we do, as even in the United States is the most extreme example of, freedom of speech. Yeah, that's our thing. Even in the United States, we do limit speech. This is something that a lot of people don't understand. Yes. You can't, look, I can't say it without them demonetizing. So it's, you can't
reasonable time and place.
Fighting words.
There's all sorts of stuff that you can't do. And that's because these are things that 99.9% of people would say, well, of course, like even if you support
Yeah.
freedom of speech, you can't possibly have a civil society without threats and the exploitation of young people, that whole thing, like that. You have to get rid of some of that stuff.
But
And
then
so
people use children in order to use to put surveillance in place. So this is where there's that friction and that constant balance and tension.
Well, and going back to the market driven aspect of this, one thing that I think gets lost is if you bring it back to cancel culture itself, which in its purest form, it's people getting fired over their beliefs, over their statements. I've had this discussion with friends of mine where I've proposed the solution. What if we essentially got rid of or seriously altered the idea of at-will employment, so that essentially you added political opinion as a protected class. In the United States, we have these things called protected classes. You can't fire someone for their race, their sex, whatever. But the problem therein that was brought up to me, and I thought it was a good point, was if you go too far in that direction and you're not thinking about this in enough of a nuanced way, what you're going to do is put companies in a position where somebody can be screaming the N-word on Twitter, like doing something that is really like that. It's understandable why they're going to get boycotted if they have, if the CEO of Coca-Cola is just typing the N-word into Twitter on a daily basis and like seeing how it goes. Like I know it's ridiculous, but hypothetically,
I don't know.
Right?
That
you have to be ready for
maybe
anything.
the president of the
You
United
have to be
States.
ready for anything, right?
Can I say that that's
Which
funny?
I'm still not over, by the way. I'm still not over the fact that the president of the United States was doing that. It is still, I'm not over it. It's
but my
weird.
point in saying this is,
anyway,
as funny as it may be, and it is hilarious to imagine, as funny as it may be, it's understandable why, maybe in a less ridiculous scenario, you have an employee who is somewhere in the chain of command at a company, they are found out to be like an active member of the KKK or something, like something where the company understandably needs to get rid of them for something that could be argued is a political opinion or a political orientation, right? There's something political about being in the KKK, not entirely political, but something political about that. Is that you run into this problem where we do need to draw the line somewhere. Like people conflate. This is also where you get the counter argument to cancel culture, where people say it's just consequences. And it's like, okay, yes, and there needs to be consequences.
No free speech without consequences.
Right. But the problem with that is what we're trying to say, and they don't understand, is it's not that we don't want there to be consequences. It's simply that we think the consequences have been severely disproportionate to the crimes. And without that nuance, you get bogged down in that consequences conversation. So I think it's important to realize
the court is for the nuance. So generally, I don't know if it works the same here, but politicians tend to enjoy passing the buck onto the courts. So when they pass legislation, because they don't want to catch, like we're going, with the gender, there's a problem there, but it's not as big a problem as people think. There's a legal problem there that can be sorted out case by case. It's going to take time. It's going to need resources, but on a case by case basis, okay, this is where the courts kick in. Interpretation of the law, application of the law on a case by case, depending on the facts of the case. And that's where making sure that we have a robust justice system, which again, you guys this is probably a cultural difference where I have a lot more faith in sort of, our legal system. Again, not perfect, not superior, just different. But you go to court. If that happens, there's a disproportionate response. It's not consequences, because if you defame someone, that's also consequences. If you cyberbully someone, there's consequences. If you dox somebody, there's legal consequences. If you harass, the law exists. It's just that you need to make sure that people have access to get, to be able to exercise the rights that they have. So it's that the laws actually exist. The process exists there. It's about actually access to, like defamation suits are notoriously expensive. Legal fees are expensive. You can't, international, you can't sue someone across seas, like there's jurisdictions, there's all these other things that can easily be resolved at the policy level and make it so, you get what I'm saying? Like, again, you might think that it's a different, I just find it interesting where, because tech is not sort of a law unto itself. These legal frameworks exist. And I think that by saying that it's new, we buy into this idea that tech is somehow outside of the realm and purview of government, which it is not. And I hope that we start to reel them in, which they're not. Don't forget, Section 230 reform, that's the United States. It's not Australia. We're seeing, each country clamp down differently. Like I'm of the view that each of them should have headquarters in each country, or they should federate their technology so that we can, so that they can actually be, that should be a requirement. But, there's all these other things. but I'm saying that there's you can enforce the law. You've just got to be able to, as we go through the courts, you're seeing these things get to the courts. They're going to the High Court, and the judgment is it's new. Like the research is new, the internet's new, believe it or not. And again, a lot, like they were 15 years asleep on the internet to begin with, so they're behind in terms of legislation. But when it goes to the court to be tested, the courts are generally ruling in favor of, in the right way, generally speaking, right? They're generally ruling in favor of these principles here. I don't know whether
that's what I was going to say
UK,
is I feel like in the United States we're having
you
issues
guys,
because
you
the
guys
at-will
have
employment thing. Yeah, they just fire you, and
at-will,
they don't even doesn't matter.
But that's a policy problem of that's again an economic one, right?
You're a libertarian, Max. So go ahead.
The reason is it's all about incentives. There is zero incentive for a company in the United States. Like, it's stupid, but it makes sense in their warped logic. It makes sense. There's no incentive for a company to keep you with and deal with that bad publicity. Just fire you.
Yeah.
Why would they want it? And when you said, I have cancel culture clauses in my contracts, that's brilliant. Hold people to their contracts.
Yeah. Yeah.
Make sure that you are being protected. There you go. Then no problem.
But this is where things like making sure that, people aren't so much, I say, do you want to eat? Do what we say is like kind of do you want healthcare? Do what we say.
Yeah.
That's so embedded in American culture that's just inherently authoritarian.
Yeah, they're being held hostage, essentially.
Yeah, and you're being held hostage. And for me, I think reminding people that it's not like Australia. When I'm talking about American politics, which is downwind for all of us, because people don't know the difference. We've got people down here who think they're fighting for their First Amendment rights. All the people that it's like they have no idea what they're talking about. They're idiots. But again, political literacy is low. But they think that if you lose your job, you just get another one. It's like, well, it's not that simple. There's lag time. It can take months to get another job. If you've been cancelled or disgraced, you could, and you need to be able to live in that time, first of all. So you're going to take money from all the all the interview and media people, and you're going to take all of that stuff. The incentive's there if you lose your job. So you've got to remove that incentive. You're going to lose your health care. You're going to lose, unemployment insurance, which I am amazed, like I said, is at the discretion of the employer, not provide. That's an amazing thing, because we've got at least that sort of baseline safety net. If you lose your job, and you can sue for unfair dismissal. We don't have at-will employment, even though that's slowly eroded over time. But we've got enterprise bargaining agreements where you can't get away with that kind of stuff, right? And that's where I know that becomes a culture difference and history, which is just, it's so far gone. We're not going to go into Medicare for all of those things, but I'm just saying that baseline, it's an economic problem.
Yeah.
Where you cancel culture will only work if people can be cancelled and suffer.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
That's why these celebrities, and we can cuss on this stream, that's why these celebrities don't care. If you cancel a celebrity, they have what I like to call fuck you money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who cares?
It's very different. Yeah, exactly.
If I or somebody down the street gets, let's say, use my example from earlier, gets recorded at a city council meeting saying things, and someone says, well, I thought what he said was racist, he could lose his job and be out of work and literally lose his house. It is not the same.
I feel bad if I have to send food back at a restaurant. Like, how
do you feel? Me too. Let alone
how do you sleep with that? Like,
I don't know. And that's why I have taken, I just don't understand. And that's why I think I've got so many thoughts in my brain right now. I think just going back to getting involved in things like that, even with the economic factors, especially in the United States, I think will help, because it's been said, you might not care about politics, but politics cares about you. Yeah. So you can say all you want. And I was someone who, I don't really have a history of I was a super right winger or a super left wing person. Then I got into politics and now I'm libertarian. I literally did not vote in the first election I could vote in the United States. I didn't care. I was like, who cares? It's politics, whatever. And it's because I grew up in a household where you don't talk politics. You do your thing. My parents said, don't look at the R or the D.
Nice.
Just, in a way.
Doesn't that sound lovely now?
Yes. Now I'm like, man, if I could just go back 12 years, that would be good.
Can we make it impolite, please?
Well, my dad's rule was you don't talk politics, religion, or family feuds because it's rude. Like, who cares? People are going to do their thing. And on one hand, I'm grateful, but on the other hand, I'm like, I've had to do so much research just into history, like you said, because no one taught me those things. I had basic, and I went to private school in the United States. It's not like, people are like, well, it's public school. Republicans are like, oh, it's public school, whatever. Which I agree is a problem. But I went to private school. In private school, all they did was teach basic civics. They don't teach you like the history of all that. They briefly mention like, all these things and like figures, and you just kind of have to figure a way out. But even like I've learned more in the past like 4 years just doing my own research than I ever did in school. And I went to like a prestigious private school that my parents paid a lot of money for. That's insane. The fact that most people don't even realize the historical context for, let's say, even just like stuff like the Civil War in the United States. You talk to people and they're like, they just parrot clearly what we all learned in like history class in 8th grade. Like they don't understand like middle school stuff. They've never looked into it. And so I think when it comes to cancel culture and tech, a lot of it is whether they're cognizant of it or not, they're taking advantage of the blind spots in political literacy of people. And I think that's why it's so hard.
They're cognizant of it.
Yeah, well, especially now they are. Well, and that's the thing. Like, I'm considering, especially in the United States, making a video because, like, I don't think people realize, like, if you really want to go back and argue, we could very easily argue. Like, my father-in-law laid the ARPANET cables in my city. Like, the Defense Department in the United States laid the foundation for the internet.
Yes, exactly.
So if you really want to argue, private property, libertarians, I'm like, no. If we really want to argue and get down to the science of it, none of it's private property. We don't have property rights when it comes to the internet. Stop saying, censorship and free speech. We don't have that. It was literally created by the government.
It's the railroads all over again.
Literally, though, like, well, it's so silly.
That internet history, I think actually that's another thing is that people think that the internet has always been the same. I think that, again, that's that tension between, as a Gen Xer who was on the internet from 14 is very different to a millennial who's on at 15, and very different to a Gen Z. Gen Z, I think millennials are the ones who are really struggling with this stuff.
Me.
Gen Z know a life. But Gen Z know a life of relative sort of maturity before the internet. Millennials, they were very young.
Yeah,
but it was like
I had dial-up.
Gen Z have integrated it. My son, he's just like, hey, whatever.
Gen Z scares me.
Yeah, they don't actually. It's showing that I think that the younger generation have figured out a way to just exist more offline and they know the deal. They know the deal with that, like with youth in China, where they know that there's the censorship. They know that all of these things. You guys, they weren't sold on freedom or sold on an idea, and
we're like the in between.
They know that they go, don't say that on there, and that's where the bait and switch is very important, I think, because
the way I would describe this is a really interesting point about the generational differences and the way we've kind of digested the internet. So everything pre-millennial, you have a decent amount of your life that is pre-internet. I mean, everything that you kind of have your pretty much all the way up to adulthood. With Gen Z, the internet is so naturally integrated. And the most interesting one is millennial. And Mack, as I recall, we're like almost the same age or exactly the same age. I'm 26. So I think
27.
Okay. So we're like almost exactly the same age. So, we're right. So Mack and I are millennials. And with millennials, the thing that I always say is we had this brief little period without the internet effectively.
It was glorious.
Right. Yeah.
It was glorious.
Right,
I had to tell my mom to get off the phone so I could use the internet. Okay.
Right.
Like, it was great.
So there's this moment that we have. For me, it was until I was like 10, 11, where basically more or less there was no internet as like a part of your daily life, at least.
Yeah.
And what happened when the internet became a part of your daily life, when I was like 12, 13, 14, or around that age, is you start using it and getting very excited about it, but you're always grasping for things that you can't have once you're on the internet. Yes. And that is what millennials are so awkward. Yeah, there's an awkwardness to millennials' existence on the internet, to the constant grasping for like Harry Potter and all these things that brought us together before the internet, right? Like it's
and also just with Gen X, because Gen X get forgotten a lot in this whole story because it's often millennials versus boomers.
Yeah,
and Gen X get caught in this crossfire.
there's a whole group in there that
and I was an early adopter. So most of my peers, like I'm 42, most of my peers weren't on none of my friends, like I said, I thought that the internet was a secret. So I wrote on there. Like it's just a foreign concept now. And then my mum and my sister saw my website and, it's just like these collisions of worlds. I don't think people realize quite what that involves. But Gen X were lumped in with boomers because a lot of them weren't on as teenagers. Right. A lot of them were on in their 20s and they'd already had established offline friendships and networks and all of that sort of stuff. Whereas with millennials, it was very integrated, like it was an integrated part of your life. So Gen X very much have this idea that the internet is still not real life. It's separate from real life. And that's what my book's about, is like my journey through that and like these weird events and touch points. But boomers just resisted it and resisted it and resisted it and resisted it. And I was going, take this seriously, take this seriously, take this seriously. Millennials are telling me, shut the fuck up, shut the fuck up. And it's like, we're constantly in this sort of tension between this generational war of people who like, it's like being in it's like Australia in the middle of a war with the US and China. It's very similar. Gen X are Australia and you've got China, but we're kind of stuck in the middle where, but because I just happen to I'd done it so much earlier, I've got this historical view, and I don't think people see how significant that documented internet history, because you're also seeing big tech erase a lot of that history.
Yeah. Like I said, I tell people that
you can disappear.
They call me a conspiracy theorist for saying the Defense Department laid the internet, and I'm like, Google. You can Google it. Yeah. For now.
Yeah, but I mean, I've gone viral before. You don't know that. It's disappeared. You know what I'm saying? Because it was on the old
I
internet.
was on the radio and I got deleted off Twitter. So guess what? That's not there anymore. It's creepy.
Yeah. And so that's a big part of sort of what I'm trying to do, is to document some of this story, because I think that that's a bit that's left out, is just how much has changed in like the space of 15 years.
Oh yeah.
Like that's a massive amount of change and even just for a human brain. Like my interest is, will we evolve or will we split in two? Like, well, that's what I actually sit there as humans. Will there, like I have hope with Gen Z, because they seem to have somehow figured out that it's all bullshit. Like I talk to my son and he's, what I mean? They're very online, but they're okay. They understand that it's all bullshit, but there's a whole mental health crisis coming here that, again, I have a beef with BetterHelp, for example, which is that's an entirely American product. Because let's turn the lack of mental health care into an app, shall we? And just open it up to the internet. And I go, oh yeah, because that went well the first time with Tumblr. But it's just like, it's like, until we look at root causes, like people can't get access to mental health care, or they're hurting, or they're traumatized, or you know what I mean? Like
it's putting a Band-Aid on it, essentially.
They're starving. I joke about it, we're kind of living in a bit of a death cult right now. It feels that way. Because you've been gaslit and fucked around and split into factions. And like with cults, they split people into factions within cults as well. And that's what I see this woke MAGA thing seems to be, factions within the same cult, which is that celebrity cult, online celebrity and influence stuff.
Yeah.
And it's really unhealthy for people. And
when I also think a big part of it, I think a big part of it, talking about like cults and like factions and things like that, I've also noticed, and this has to do with cancel culture, and I think that's why it's such a big topic. People will find something to attach their personality to. For a lot of people, that is, I mean, I call myself an anarcho-capitalist, but that's a big reason I'm also like, hey, I do costuming. I have like weird nerdy things on my shelves. Like I'm a human being.
You're fine. Yeah.
Right. I'm like, I'm a human being. I'm not just like this political label. And I actually joked, like, since we've been talking about Trump, I said, what are the people going to do when he's gone that like rose to fame in this cult of personality and they're called like MAGA girls or guys, what are they going to do when that's gone? Like legitimately, they might have a crisis of like mental health, because like when you attach yourself to something like that, what do you do when that's gone? And that's so bad on the internet. And then you've got the parasocial aspect where all these people are like depending on you to like be the based person that's like going to give them their dopamine back and forth.
Well, that's
like,
my problem with,
it's crazy.
Well, that was my problem with J.K. Rowling. J.K. Rowling, who I have a very more complicated and nuanced view on J.K. Rowling because of that, which is that she had a generation of kids who adored her.
Me.
And no, but I'm saying,
and
like,
I'm not sorry. I will not apologize
but regardless,
for it.
Yeah, but no, don't. But I watched this, and she said nothing wrong. I think that, but it's like that's not the issue. It was the timing. It was the response. It's again, when you talk about cancel culture and who's being cancelled, I think that responsibility factor is washed over with a lot of influencers as well, where they feel there comes, and I've navigated this whole thing over my life. I've been sort of more influential and actively not, like I do now, actively not sort this stuff. It's very rare for me to go on things. But there's a responsibility that, that, like I said, with that 7 to 10% of people in your audience, if you know that that's a thing and you know that they're going to like not be well, that you're going to radicalize, like this is like with figures like Tim Pool and those things. It's like, well, they skim over that part, which is the fact that they radicalized a good portion of their audience into very unhealthy things. Okay, there feels like there's a responsibility there once you've built an audience to make sure they're okay. And I think that that's something that is not treated with enough humility and not treated with again, that's just people who weren't trained, because people who are journalists have a training in ethics. Marketers who go to uni are trained in ethics. There's an ethical framework. Whereas being an influencer, you know what I mean? Like there's no influencer school. I mean,
you just go on and you can build a following.
Yeah. And it's like, no one really goes, okay, well, and I know that because I'm friends with I started my business with a lot of musicians and, artists and stuff, and like quite famous ones. And they navigated this stuff too, where with the fan culture, there's some who get it and some who really don't get it. And they think that they're a person with their own opinions. Like Nicki Minaj is another one where it's like, there's a thing there. There's a responsibility there. It's not just about her personal free speech in that sense. Does that make sense? It's more complicated than just with someone with the reach of J.K. Rowling. It was the timing. It was when kids are in a pandemic, their parents are fighting. You get what I'm saying? They love this woman. They look to her. And she kind of shat on them. Again, I tend to empathize with sort of, it's kind of, the argument becomes immaterial. It's almost like the argument and the issue becomes a distraction.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Like it actually is such a, and yes, I cancelled because I agree with her, right? But at the same time, I don't stand her or sit by what she did, right? Because she hurt a lot of her fans. And you get what I'm saying? And I just have a sort of...
I've dealt with that. I will never forget. There was, and like I had like, when I got kicked off, like 20 something. To me, in the grand scheme of things on Twitter, that's nothing. But then there are some days I would sit and be like, holy shit, 20,000, like that's a lot of people. Yeah, like that's like more than like the little where I live. That's crazy. So I would say things like, well, I'm not responsible for their behavior. But then I'd be like, okay, well, I'm not, but at the same time, the example I'm getting to is I had this guy that was following me, and this happens a lot, especially if you're a woman online. But even though I'm married and I've been with my husband since we were 18, whatever, people don't care. They don't see that. They're just like, they look up to you, which to me, I'm like, what are you doing? No, you don't really know me. But the problem is they think they do.
Exactly.
So they build this image of you, and this touches on the J.K. Rowling thing. They build this image of you, and there was one time, and I'm a little bit of a shit poster online. Like I do, that's kind of my thing. I joke around with people. you have to joke around, right? You have to be able to do that. But I didn't realize how this guy would take what I said. He said something at one point. He'd been following me for years, and because I've been on Twitter since 2009. So there were people that followed me for a very long time. So I'm sure they had some sort of parasocial thing going on. And he said something about being friends. And I said, we're not friends. Like, you don't know me.
Yeah.
That was a mistake.
Yeah.
Like to this day.
That's a rejection. Like it's a very
to this day, I get screenshots of him like saying things. And I feel at first I was like, screw this guy. He doesn't know me. Why did he take it so offensively? But then, through the years and like being off social media for this long, I come back and there are people that are like, oh my God, you're back. And I'm like, I've been gone for almost a year. You know who I am? Like, that's weird to me. But it's a thing that happens. And like with J.K. Rowling and the Harry Potter stuff is a good example. I mean, I say, I'm not going to apologize for it. I didn't mean like you were telling me to. I meant like being someone who's not like the stereotypical Harry Potter fan that people paint these days, like with blue hair and God knows what. Yeah. I generally enjoy the series. Like my books aren't there, but they're in the other room. I grew up with it. My mom would like read it to me every night before bed. Like I did generally enjoy it. I read it as an adult and I'm like, it's all right. Right.
Did you hang out in the fandom? Did you hang out in the fandom?
Like I went to like movie premieres.
So you saw that shift then
Yes. And that's what's weird about it. And that's why it's such a good example for me in particular, because you like see the shift of like, I would go to the movie premieres as a kid and like wear my cloak and stuff and like being an adult. And now there's like boomer conservative Republican United States people that are like, yeah, you guys are dumb. How come you care so much about this? I'm like, cause it was cool. Yeah. I'm like, you guys have that too. It's like my dad's relationship with like the bands he grew up listening to in the 70s and 80s. Like
how much you feel like Jesus.
Right, like or if you're a Christian, like that sort of thing. I mean, people do take the Harry Potter thing a little too far. I will say that they're religious about it. I'm not religious about it. It's just important because it's something I grew up with and it's cool. Like who cares,
But in those fandoms, actually, that's a lot of where this stuff came from in the history. And what happened was that it's actually this is where it's set that the fandoms became a political asset.
Yes.
Like if you look at it in terms of like cultural assets, like the history of cultural assets, in like all of this stuff, which was that you started to see this deconstructionist, because it's ripe for this stuff, right? Rife, whatever the word. I always get confused, ripe or rife. But the fandoms were seen as a segment, a market segment online that you tried to reach. And what they would do is because when you're a big fan, there's a psych profile attached to that. There's a persona, there's a, motivation. And so you're fair game and already on board. So if they can go in and go, hello, fellow Potter people, and we're going to, do our product, but if that can be used politically as well. So that's where a lot of this deconstructionist batshit postmodern, it's not even postmodernism, it's a small school within the school of postmodernism, right? And it just had jet fuel poured on it by various, again, I'm not going to assume that it was a conspiracy, I'm just going to say that there's interests, right? I just see it as interests. But there's an interest in radicalizing fandoms. And turning them into activism.
It works too. I mean, we're seeing it everywhere. Like that's actually one of the reasons, like I used to keep my political stuff and my costuming stuff separate, but in recent years I'm like, no, if these people are going to talk about it, I need to talk about it. And the only reason why I do it is because there are legitimately people that are like, wait, you're not like one of those crazy people and you have the same hobby as me. Oh, cool. And they feel like it's more normal again, because it didn't used to be you go to this specific hobby and that these people have this political point of view. That was not a thing. There was all
that is
sorts
a thing
of,
now.
It is now for sure.
And that was actually, again, I think that's the designed part of this whole thing. And that's why when I first found out about this weird stuff that was going, I was just thrown off my center. Theoretically, all that stuff I went, well, where the fuck did this come from? And so my daughter was into the fandoms and all that stuff. So I went, oh, okay. This, because I wasn't in that stuff. It wasn't, but I researched this, and there was a real switch and a real shift in the politicization of Tumblr, and it became that Gamergate and Tumblr v 4chan and all of that sort of stuff. It's all it's kind of like a weird anthropological story of the internet, where it's just there's a history and a war and a battle, and a battle was won and lost.
I have to jump in here and ask, you're talking about something that I talked about on another episode with another guest recently. Are either of you familiar with someone named Default Friend on Twitter, perchance? Interesting. Okay. Well, that's cool. It's cool that you're not, because I think
I've
that
been
if you,
I've been gone, so I haven't been seeing
right. So yeah, in your case, you haven't
I
been
don't
on there, but
read
because
much.
she's somebody who she's been writing columns. I forget where. She's a columnist and a blogger and a podcast host, and she has been researching for at least, I think, like half a year now, how a lot of what we talk about today in terms of like woke culture war stuff
Yeah.
was generated via fandom Tumblr culture, or circa like 2008, 2009. And yeah. Default friend on Twitter. And she was a great guest, and you guys might want to get in touch with her, because she's been researching this very deeply, and it's a really interesting conversation. For those who are listening, if you just go to my channel, you'll see the episode wasn't that long ago with Default Friend. But yeah, that is something that really was appealing to me, because it seems like, what I always say is, this stuff accelerated the cancel culture, and everything accelerated so much around 2010, like give or take a few years. And if you're trying to find culprits for what really made it accelerate to the point where it was impossible to ignore, you go, okay, 2008, 2012, what's happening in that time period? Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, it's a Tumblr, right? All of the fandoms, all of the social media stuff, that sort of flipping pop culture and the whole entertainment industry on its head via the internet, I think is something that is often ignored, but shouldn't be.
Yeah. The only time I have ever been I can't believe I didn't get taken down when this happened. The only time I have ever been like legitimately, I've had death threats like from 2 or 3 people, like occasionally, but it's never like in a serious like mob of like thousands of people. But one day I made the mistake of interacting with someone, and they said I had a big forehead, and I said, so do you, but it's cool because we're both cute. And it was an Asian person. Little did I know that person was a K-pop stan.
Oh shit.
And here's the thing. What was so messed up is I enjoy K-pop. Like, I'm into the Japanese stuff, costuming, things like that. I felt betrayed. I was like, no, what? I just didn't know that was a famous person. Well, I literally I just handed the phone to my husband, and I was like, and I've never had to do that. Like I said, I've been doxxed, all that sort of, and I've never been like literally shaken up by it. But I now understand, like, it's when there are thousands of accounts tweeting death threats at you and terrible, just like people are tweeting at me pictures of miscarriages and things like that. It was disgusting. Like, it on my Instagram, they found my cosplay Facebook page, everything just inundated with this stuff. I just put my phone down for 48 hours and they eventually went away. But I had to private all my accounts and whatever. And that was a fandom, because they get into these fandoms. And that's where a lot of and if you think about it, it kind of makes sense, like, that cancel culture comes from that, because like you kind of talked about, Téa, they're already centralized. They already have tons of people that all like one thing. So all you have to do is tell them, as a community, we stand for this thing, and this person is against that. And boom, it's just like a wildfire. That's what happens.
But they also have that predisposition for obsessions as well, because, and that's also, but this is also where some of that is artificial.
Yeah.
So
there were definitely
bots on it. You pour geopolitics and all this stuff and fuckery. This is why everyone's confused, because a lot of this largely astroturf. I had an AI bot. They actually have AI. Like, remember in the early days of Twitter, where if you tweeted the word iPad, you'd get a whole bunch of iPad spam. I don't know if you remember that. But now it's an AI that can converse with you. And I've had like them show up on my Periscope chat, like when I'm streaming, or I've had them and they use publicly available information to look real. And this is it's a lot more sophisticated. It is really, it tried to get me to come to Jesus. Quite funny. And me and my crew, actually, because I know I can read this stuff, I can spot it in, like, a bot from a mile off, an AI. And I'm like the boss fight for this stuff, and we broke it. We absolutely broke this bot. It was so funny because it said, your husband's name is Paul, and like all of this stuff that's out there.
Creepy.
It was very strange, but it was like, come to Jesus and your daughter will talk to you again. And all, it's like, it was just like really psychologically manipulative stuff. But but after, what I found very interesting was that after that, wasn't getting bots anymore. So at some point, see, again, when you understand that this stuff's all being A/B tested, all being implemented by these like digital agencies that work in the darkness to sort of nudge needles and manipulate people and sway them in certain directions, that nudging that occurs, that this is where I think it's a new threat, that people are just, that kids who think they've got friends, but they're just bots, and people who think they've got, like TikTok love bombs, it's notorious for that love bomb, right? And they think that they're popular, they think they've got friends, but it's because you're an asset. They use you like a cultural asset, but they use everyday people as cultural assets for propaganda and stuff. Like I've been approached several times by various places, like, can you planting stories and stuff.
Yeah. Well, even like
about America or whatever. And I've been caught a few times. Right.
Even like marketing stuff, like as far as like the influencer culture, which I hate that word, but because I think it's that kind of is what convinces people like, oh, well, I'm an influencer. And it's like, no, you're not. You just, they want you to market this thing and you're doing it. Like when I first started to get on Instagram, and like my cosplay Facebook page is fairly large. It's kind of dead now because the algorithm just sucks and I just don't use it anymore. But when I first started gaining a following on there, you would get approached by like, even just like innocently, like not like tech people or media, but like clothing brands being like, hey, we'll send you free clothes. And like now people do that. I'm like, so like, what is your fee? Like, you're going to pay me, right? You're not just going to send me free clothes and I give you exposure. That's not how this is going to work. I'm not dumb, because I understand marketing and things like that now. Yeah. But I didn't back then. And I was like 19 on Instagram. It has a couple thousand followers, and these like Chinese clothing brands are like, we'll send you free clothes. I'm like, cool, send them on over. I'll post pictures, whatever. It's like, that's not getting paid. They're just literally using you for marketing. Yeah. It's not a thing.
And I worked in that area early on in my career. Like that was where I sort of fell out of that stuff into campaigning. And when you see that used for politics.
Yes. Oh, and there are definitely political
that actually
influencers.
have a political outcome. And that's why I think that's my journey. And I think maybe even what I've talked about with you today, Scott, might be different to what we discussed a year ago, because after I came out the other side, and I think I had a simplistic view on my own, because I've gone through this for 27 years, as I know. I've written on the internet and had, I had audiences and stuff, gone through all the death threats and all of that stuff over the years. But then I realized that there was actually a political outcome, and to really think about what political outcome, policy outcome, or who you're helping when you share certain information. And for me, it was like, okay, well, talking about the culture wars, that's why I've sort of, with Tim Pool, it's a little uncomfortable, because it feels like he's stoking the flames and escalating rather than de-escalating. And it's, again, nothing, dude's got to eat, and it's the system. I don't hate the player, hate the game. And it frustrates me. But at the same time, I think that the IDW particularly have to take responsibility for that portion of their audience that does head, in either direction. Right. I think that.
Yeah. I mean, even in like libertarian circles, there's like right now there's a bunch of people that have, and I was one of them, obviously, at one point. You gain a following and then you say certain things. It kind of like you said when you were criticizing some people that claim to be the left, and you would have a bunch of MAGA people follow you and be like, oh yeah, you're our girl. I would
tell them to,
and you'd be like, well, actually, I think you guys are idiots too. Right. Well, and you get that a lot, but there's when you're first starting out, and social media is just incentivized this way too. And I think that's why that stokes like the culture war stuff and all that, like talking about stoking that. There, you realize everyone is cognizant of this. At a certain point, when you say or talk about a certain topic, these are the people you're going to attract. Yeah. It's impossible not to. I know still to this day, if I say one thing, these are the people that are going to be angry. These are the people it's going to bring to me. So to claim, that's where the responsibility thing, I'm kind of like, I don't want to say I'm neutral on it, but I understand like both things, because you cannot claim to not know what you're doing after a certain point. Like, what type of person is going to be doing this. Now, how much you're responsible, that's another discussion, but you have to know at some point what you're doing. So like people would tell me like, well, you're just saying this to make people mad. I'd be like, yeah, I knew that would piss off that segment of Twitter. Yes. And you've given me the views now. Thank you.
Yeah.
I vastly
people know that.
underestimated it. Yeah. If I had known differently before I said the wrong naughty thing, I stayed quiet for a year, and I thought it was a policy issue, the gender stuff, right? It was just like, okay. And it was a good faith thing. Everyone was asking, what's happened? What's happened? And I saw something downwind from the US. I went, hey, we better pay attention to this. And I started talking. Even I, knowing everything that I know, vastly underestimated the shitstorm that was awaiting me.
Oh yeah.
And the silence, right? And all of that stuff. And that was always good faith. You get what I'm saying? But I can see, but then you get that love bomb, you get that tribe, and then they turn on you in a dime. You know, like all of that, like, and then you go, whoa, I hadn't been on Twitter in a while. This is crazy. And so I think that lending your voice to people is probably something that people should take more seriously.
Yes.
Even if they've only got, it's like, okay, especially in light of this is why I've stayed out of the vaccination thing. I've stayed out of this stuff because I go, look, you get what I'm saying? It's like, yeah, you can.
Well, you're damned if you do and damned if you don't.
Yeah. And you're going to give fuel to the radicalized people on either side, and you're going to stoke the flames of division rather than, even if you are personally having a reasonable conversation in good faith, I think that you have to be aware of the fact that your words can be used and borrowed as authority on something. First of all, you're not an authority on. I talk about three things, and but like that can be borrowed and used as authoritative stuff. I've seen stuff that I've talked about borrowed and used by bad actors at various other, where they add authority. All these people think this person says this. I think you got to really think about that. You know what I mean? Like, okay, am I ultimately helping an anti-trans bill in the United States that help? You get what I'm saying? You get what I'm saying? As what's downwind from that?
Well, yeah, even with like
talking about this,
I said, like, I ended up on the radio. Like I tweeted, I'm very into like 70s, 80s classic rock. That's like all I listen to.
Cool.
Which means I'm like, that's why I'm like, well, yeah, I'm a millennial, but like, because like at some point I'm just like, what is that saying? Like, I don't understand. But I had tweeted because I saw an interview with Billie Eilish saying she didn't know who Van Halen was. And I love Van Halen. See, that was my reaction. And I actually do. I say I don't listen to modern music. I actually really do enjoy some of Billie Eilish's music too. And so because I was kind of a fan of her, and it was funny because like at some point someone on Twitter accused me of being a classic rocker mom, because I guess they didn't like know what my age was. So I've like, it's become a meme. Like I'm actually really old, and I like am like in my 60s, and I really like classic rock music. And this is just like some AI thing. But so I tweeted, I said, I can't believe Billie Eilish does not know who Van Halen is. I'm crying with like laughing emojis. Oh, well, it went viral. And then the articles were written like
kicked in.
Everyone criticizes Billie Eilish I'm like, no. I'm a fan of her. And now I'm like, great. Now Billie Eilish probably thinks I hate her. I don't hate her. I'm a fan. But it was just, like you said, fandoms kicked in. Everybody that liked her, even though I was a fan of her, I'm a fan of both. Even, somebody in the band, somebody in Van Halen came out and was like, I don't have a problem with her not knowing who I am. And I'm like, oh my God, now Van Halen hates me. Oh my God.
Unintended consequences thing, right? But knowing, I think I learned this early on because I went viral in 2011 for something where journalists were very early on starting to take tweets and turn it into stories.
Yeah.
And so I figured this out pretty early on. And so I did a thing that proved the concept and went, yeah, okay, everything that I say, I learned that very early on, that what you say, I mean, all my whole life, I've had consequences, right, for what I say and write, and not necessarily thought ahead. And I think that maybe I'm just a bit further ahead because I've had a 10-year lead on most people.
Yeah.
But knowing that could be used, not to say something that could be used in the least charitable way possible.
Yes.
And I think that, again, that's a preventative thing for cancel culture as well, which is to go, okay, and I know we're all hot-headed and all of those things. I say stupid things all the time. I still forget that Twitter's not what it used to be. I can't just say what I want to say. But I do pause for a minute and I go, okay, well, what is the worst way this could be seen if it blew up?
Yeah.
What could, everyone's got to treat themselves like they're a public figure. It shouldn't be that way, but I think it just is.
It's the it ends up being the reality that we're in, unfortunately. And I think that it's kind of incumbent upon people, especially people with a platform, to on one hand, you have to understand that people are going to get angry if you say something that angers one side or the other side, or the extremes on both sides. Like, people are going to get angry no matter, and you have to be willing to put up with that to a certain extent. I mean, I had it where after the election, I was not particularly happy with Trump's what I do consider not really all that validated theories about what happened in the election. I spoke out very strongly about that, and I lost a few dozen subscribers. And I was like, that is what's going to happen when I do that. And maybe I would have felt differently if I lost a couple hundred. Maybe then I would have been like, no, I'm sorry. But
or the troll farm just switched you off. That's what. I know that sounds weird, but it's actually what's happening.
But I, at the end of the day, it's kind of incumbent upon everyone to be ready for that stuff and to be willing to, because you say. You can always, I think the same thing about somebody like Tim Pool. And Tim, if you end up seeing this, you're welcome to come on and chat. But it's not people personal, people say a man's got to eat, but it's like Tim Pool can eat. Dave Rubin can eat. They can all eat. Joe Rogan can eat. Like, they are eating fine. At a certain point, if it were me in that position, I like to think that I would say, okay, let me lose a few thousand people, and maybe I make a few thousand less dollars because I'm going to be okay and I'm going to eat. But I hate to have to do this, but I have to wrap us up. It's been about 2 hours, but this was a fantastic conversation.
Yeah, it's great.
And I want to thank you both, Téa and Mack, for coming onto the show. But before we sign off, I want to make sure that you both get a chance to plug anything you want to plug. Everyone who comes on the show, I want to make sure they can, promote what they want to promote. So we had Mack start the show. So Téa, if you want to just talk about anything you want to promote, and then I'll go to Mack.
Just follow me on Twitter, because I'm in the process of rebranding and setting up a new newsletter. It's called I Swear It's Not You, and it talks about psychology and what's happening, and it, like, all the gaslighting and just sort of a TLDR of the culture wars and how it's not you. But I'm also writing a book and a few other things. So the best way is to just follow me on Twitter and watch my stuff if you want. My streams are just my practice rambling. It's not my main thing. So.
Thanks, Téa. And then Mack.
Yeah, so if you want to find me, you can pretty much find everything at kenziepuff.com. That should be on the screen there. That's my website. I have a blog there. I'm going to start writing on a lot more often now that I'm back on social media after months and months off. So you can find everything there, my costuming, politics, whatever you want to find. And another thing I'll plug is I've been doing social media work and things for a website called hoppien.org. And we are probably the biggest preachers of localism getting involved and actually doing what needs to be done and what must be done, especially if you're coming from a place where you're just really not sure to do, and there has to be solutions for things. So you can check them out on all socials pretty much at the Hoppien. So
great. Well, thanks again so much to
Yes.
Yeah, there people who are listening to this, there is stuff that you can do to make things better. And I really encourage you to actually do something. If you get anything out of this conversation, I think that the fact that there's hope and there's stuff that you should do, and there's a responsibility you have to take along the way, but you gotta step into this situation because it is quickly getting out of hand. I think that would be an understatement. But in any case,
dies in darkness, guys.
Yeah. To borrow a quote from a great newspaper but
ironically,
from a wonderful that has never lied. But in any case, thank you again, Téa and Mack, for coming on to the show. This is my first ever roundtable, and I plan on doing more of this. For everyone listening, thanks for listening to the first ever roundtable edition of the Veritas Podcast. Let me know what you thought of this conversation, what you thought of the topic, what you thought of this format. I plan on doing more of these on different topics. If you're listening to the show on iTunes, please leave a 5-star review. It really, really helps the show. And if you're listening on YouTube or watching on YouTube, please give a thumbs up and or like the podcast. I always forget which one's 5-star, which one's thumbs up. If you're listening on YouTube or watching on YouTube, thumbs up, like it, and then let us know what you thought. And please do subscribe if you want to hear more of these conversations with free thinking people. And I will see you guys next time on the Veritas Podcast.